Hey guys, how you doing? In today's video we're going to be talking about 5 tips that you can use to help you die less in Call of Duty Warzone. Dying in Warzone is inevitable. It's impossible to win every game you get into, but with these tips and tricks you can cut out all those annoying deaths where you know you could have done something to easily prevent them. There are 3 main reasons why you die in Warzone: either poor positioning, bad gun mechanics, or sometimes you just whiff some shots. Sometimes you can approach a situation perfectly, have the upper hand in the fight, but your aim is just slightly off and you die because of it. Yeah, it's still a little bit annoying, but I worry about these kinds of deaths a lot less, as I know exactly what went wrong. Everyone misses shots and has off days, but if I know I approached the fight well and it was only my aim that let me down, I can move on pretty quickly. Whereas when I die from poor positioning or bad gun mechanics, I know I need to work out exactly what went wrong and make sure that I don't make the same mistake again. You may have been a little bit confused earlier when I split gun mechanics and aim into 2 separate categories, as they're normally just grouped together into gun skill. However, I find it easier to split them into 2 categories: gun mechanics, how you approach the fight, and aim, how you continue the fight after the first bullet is fired. The simplest way to differentiate the 2 is to say gun mechanics are used to set you up well for the fight, so skills like centering and pre-aiming, whereas during the fight you're using your aim, such as tracking and recoil control. If you die because your tracking is slightly off, or you're using a new gun so you aren't used to the recoil, you know exactly what you need to do to fix those problems. But if you find you aren't winning fights because your opponent has better centering than you and has pre-aimed you as you come around a corner, you need to work on the fundamentals of your game. But differentiating between the 2 skills and not being like most people who just chalk off every kill to, well, that guy just had better aim than me, you'll start to see serious improvements in your game. If death doesn't come under either of the previous categories, I found it's pretty much always down to poor positioning. Whether that's something as simple as getting caught out in an open field, or rotating late and getting gatekept on the edge of the zone. All of these deaths can be prevented by just a little thought and planning ahead. This leads us nicely onto our first tip: always have cover. And short of that, if you have to be out in the open, you should know where your nearest cover is. Sometimes you are forced out into open areas, but if you are, you should always know where the nearest cover is, and have a plan on how to get there as quickly as possible. If you come under fire, your first reaction should be to protect yourself, not just get stranded out in the open looking round like a lemon. Cover not only gives your enemy a small target to hit, but it also allows you to control the gunfight. You get to choose when and where you pop out, how long to leave between peaks, and you always have a place to fall back to if you need to plate up. Just make sure you don't play too predictably by peeking the same head glitch or the same side of cover every single time, as your opponent will be able to pre-aim you and could well take you out. A more advanced tip for if you're pinned down behind cover by a sniper is to jump out as far as possible from the cover using bunny hops. You need to be sure of your aim to do this, but you'll be miles away from the point where they'll be pre-aiming, which should give you enough time to hit a few shots flinching their aim up before they can make a flick shot onto your head. This makes it almost impossible for them to take you out. That's the great thing about cover: it's not just about having it, it's also how you use it. Tip number 2, rotations. This ties in quite nicely with the previous tip, as planning your rotations properly allows you to avoid or minimise the risk of crossing open areas with little cover. There's nothing worse than having the gas at your back forcing you to cross wide open flat areas like the airport, where you know as soon as you set foot out of your cover, everyone in the lobby will spray you down. Whilst in these situations, it's easy to say, well, I was just a bit unlucky with how the zones fell. By planning ahead, you could have done something to survive the situation. When you are planning your rotations, you should think of the game in 2 separate sections: the early game, which is up to the 3rd zone, and the late game from the 3rd zone to the end of the match. I like to split the match up into these 2 phases, as the way you need to think about rotations during these periods varies wildly. When the circle is still pretty large, you have to be very unfortunate to run into someone who is gatekeeping the edge of zone, and by using a vehicle you can basically reduce the risk of you getting held out in the gas to 0. Whereas later in a match where the circles are smaller, if you rotate in late with the gas at your back, you're almost guaranteed to run into someone holding the edge of zone. You may think, well, why can't I just use a vehicle like earlier in the match? Whilst this is true, vehicles are much less abundant later in the game, so it's not always possible to have one to hand. And in some cases, you're forced through heavily built up areas where the vehicles can easily get stuck and destroyed. The later you are into a match, the more attention you have to pay to how the zones are moving, and which areas it's likely to force you to move across. A common tactic I see in later zones is to only move when you're forced to, but this adds a lot of luck into your rotation, as you never know who might be watching the edge of the circle. By committing to a rotate as soon as the new zone forms, you give yourself so many more options. First, if you do manage to get to the new circle unscathed, you'll be perfectly set up to get free kills on your enemies who are being forced in by the gas. And if you do get shot, at least you have enough time to come up with a new plan to safely get into zone, as you won't have the gas forcing you in. A lot of players see early rotations as putting yourself at risk earlier than necessary, but it's better to take the risk on your own terms rather than being forced into a certain death situation by the gas. Rotations are actually quite complicated as a topic, so I'll be doing a video soon going over more specific situations and techniques that you can use to safely transition between zones. If you want to check that out, I'll make sure to add a card now and put a link in the description once the video is out. I mentioned them quickly in the previous section, but the third tip is to utilise vehicles. Whilst treating the game like a driving simulator isn't exactly the most fun, vehicles are essential to your survival. Not only do they allow you to make faster rotations, but they also double up as portable cover, allowing you to cross wide open areas safely, which, as mentioned in the previous tip, is a very easy way to die. The biggest mistake I see players making is getting into vehicles without a plan. It's easy to fall into the trap of just aimlessly driving around for half the match, and whilst this is relatively safe to do, especially in Bertha, you aren't setting yourself up well for winning the game. You're giving everyone else in the lobby half a match to get money, loadouts, and the perfect position, while you're just driving around hoping to survive. By knowing exactly where you're going whenever you get into a vehicle, whether that be hunting an enemy, going to a buy station, getting a contract, or finding a power position, you're using the vehicle to help you win the game, not just as a crutch way of avoiding fights and getting a top 25 placement. Just before we get on to the next tip, if you're enjoying this video, make sure to like as it helps the content get out there and the channel to grow. I'm currently making a series of tip videos, so if you're enjoying this one and want to improve other parts of your game, check them out in the playlist on the end screen. Anyway, let's get on with the next tips. The fourth tip is to work on your centering and pre-aiming. I feel like I mention this in most videos, but it just shows how important it is. By having your crosshairs well placed before a fight even takes place, you're giving yourself the best possible chance to win the gunfight, and therefore die less. If you know an enemy is around the corner or hidden in a building, make sure you're pre-aiming the most likely place that they'll be, then all you have to do is fire for what should be an easy elimination. If you want a more detailed breakdown of both of these skills, make sure to check out my video on how to win more gunfights in the playlist on the end screen. The fifth tip to help you die less is patience. The two main situations I've found where patience is essential to your survival is either when you're rotating into zone behind another player, or when you're waiting for the perfect moment to take your first shot after you snuck up on an unsuspecting target. If you're miles away from the new zone with the gas at your back, the last thing you need is to get into a gunfight. Not only will this delay you and make it pretty likely that even if you do win the fight, you'll still get taken out by the gas, but you're also going to be making a lot of noise. So even if you win the fight and save yourself from the gas, there'll probably just be an enemy on the edge of the zone who is attracted by the gunfire, ready to take you out as you run to safety. The second situation is pretty simple. If your opponent hasn't spotted you, get as close as possible to them before you take your first shot. You need to guarantee the kill before they can even react, so there's no chance that they'll be able to turn on you or quickly run into cover. Being closer also has the added benefit that your target is bigger, so it's easier to hit your shots, and most weapons do more damage up close for a faster TTK. Only take the first shot when you know for certain that you'll be able to take them out instantly, and if you're sniping, make sure not to miss the headshot. By applying these tips to your own game, you should die less and hopefully get more wins. Just remember, whilst playing passively can get you top 25 finishes, it's almost impossible to win the game as you aren't set up well for the final circles. By implementing these tips, you can start to play smarter and with more confidence, while still keeping yourself safe throughout the game. By playing like this, you'll be able to set yourself up perfectly to win the game, which camping in a building or driving around in a vehicle definitely won't do. If you found this video useful, make sure to watch the playlist currently on screen to give you more tips on how to improve at Warzone. Thanks for watching.